People's Radio United.
When it comes to safety, most people would say that the most important thing is knowing what your rights are. And as part of Communities United Against Police Brutality, I know you're one of their Know Your Rights trainers.
Right.
I went through that process too to become a Know Your Rights trainer. But specifically as a cop watcher, knowing your rights is really important, and knowing your rights as they pertain to cop watching is really important. So can you take us through what those rights are and how to use them, how to exercise them?
Definitely. Now some rights do vary state to state, so you should check your state's rights no matter what. I'm not an attorney. I can't say this is all across the board. I can give you a general overview, and I can tell you what your rights are in Minnesota specifically, just because I have the experience with that. But the biggest thing you can do is always remain calm, if possible. Just try to keep that situation calm, because police officers are not always the best at maintaining calmness in a situation. So there really are three different types of police encounters that most people have, which would be like a street encounter, a traffic stop, and the police knocking at your door. And I'll briefly walk you through your rights during those situations. So if you're stopped on the street, a police officer might be like, hey, can we talk real quick, or hey, I got a question for you, hey, whatever. My advice is if a police officer stops you on the street, just say, am I being detained or am I free to go? And if you're free to go, you can just leave that situation. You have no legal reason to be held there if you're free to go. Other times you might want to talk to the police officer. I don't know. That's an individual thing. I personally just don't like talking to any police officer. I don't want to help them in their investigations. I want as little to do with them as possible. So if I get stopped, I'm going to say, hey, am I being detained? If they say no, I'm just going to keep walking. If they say you are being detained, at least in Minnesota, you're not required to identify yourself just from being detained. You're not required to show your ID. You can just remain silent.
But as you said, these rules are different from state to state when it comes to having to identify yourself. So people should, go online and find out what the rules on that specifically are in their state. Correct?
That's right. Also check your local ACLU. They'll have plenty of resources for you to check out there. So you can check that out. That's probably the best resource that I could recommend for Know Your Rights in different states besides Minnesota. So yeah, that's a very good place to send people. It's a great resource. I'm going to move on to like a traffic stop. That's probably the best, the most common way that people get their first interaction with a police employee. So during a traffic stop, I recommend that people keep their hands visible and flat on the steering wheel at all times. So if you're pull over to the side of the road as quickly as possible. I've seen people charged for not pulling over fast enough. Typically, you have about a quarter block to a half a block to pull over before they can charge you with felony fleeing. So try to get over as quickly as possible. Sometimes that isn't always reasonable. Like if you're driving down a freeway and there's the concrete barricades on both sides, you're not going to be able to get over in a half a block. That's just not reasonable at all. But pull over as soon as you can, really. And I personally recommend that you only roll down your car window 2 to 3 inches. Just enough to pass your driver's license and insurance card and talk to the cop. It reduces the risk of that police officer saying that they smelled something coming out of the vehicle, stuff like that. And one of the things that I've personally learned through my experiences is when that police officer comes to the car window to ask you what you've done wrong, the police officer's gonna be like, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And most people will say something like, "Yeah, I was speeding," or "Yeah, I wasn't wearing my seatbelt," or something like that, which is really, really detrimental to yourself. Because if you want to fight that case in any way, you have just admitted what you did wrong, and it most likely will have been captured on camera from that police officer, whether it's the dash cam or their body cam. You've just ruined your own case. So the best way to come back with from that question is with the question. Say, "No, officer, why did you pull me over?" It admits no guilt, and it gets that reason out there very quickly. Now, in Minnesota, we have to show our driver's license and proof of insurance during a traffic stop. You have to show your driver's license because driving is a privilege, not a right. Unlike with a street encounter, it's your right to walk down a sidewalk. It's not a privilege. You don't need a license to walk down the sidewalk, but you do while driving a motor vehicle. So when the police officer asks you for your driver's license and insurance or registration in some other states, tell the police officer, say, "Hey, my insurance is in my glove box, and my ID is in my wallet. Can I reach for them now?" And wait for that police officer to give you the affirmative that you can go get those. That way, it reduces the chance of the police officer mistakenly thinking that you're going for some kind of weapon or something like that. I should also say that you shouldn't take out your seatbelt if you're pulled over until that police officer instructs you to. That way, when they come up to the window, they can't say, "Oh, you don't have your seatbelt on, I'm going to give you a ticket for that." At least in Minnesota, it is illegal to drive without a seatbelt on, or be a passenger without a seatbelt on. So always keep your seatbelt on until instructed to do so. Only the driver should speak to the police officer if you're in a car with a lot of people. Passengers should remain silent and sit still. They're not the ones being investigated. Only the driver is. So if you're pulled over, tell your passengers, say, "Hey, just be quiet." And I would say never agree to a search of your car. The reason for this is because your car might be clean. You might not do anything wrong. You might live the most wholesome life possible. But you don't know who's been in your car and what they have, or even who owned the car before you. The person that owned the car before you might have had some stuff in the car. They might have left some stuff there, and you don't want to get caught for that. I mean, personally, I drive a former police vehicle, an old Crown Victoria. I don't know what's in there. There's no way that anybody's been that a police employee is going to search my car, just because so much stuff has been through that car, and if something got left behind, I don't want to be responsible for that. So if a police officer should ask you to get out of your car, turn off your car, roll up your windows, take your keys with you, and lock your car door afterwards. That way, they can't just go into your vehicle. They have to actually take your key and open up the door, push the button on your fob or whatever, and that makes it you know, it changes the aspects in court from them just being able to openly go into your car to having to unlock it. So yeah, definitely do
Right.
that. Yeah.
Right. Because when they take your keys and use them to open your locked car, basically at that point they are doing a search without your consent, and they have to justify that in court.
Correct.
You know, I think a lot of people say, well, you ask if you're free to go or if you're detained. Well, they'll just say that they're detaining you. They can't actually do that, because when they detain you, they have to have a reason. They have to explain in court, if you challenge it, why they detained you, what they saw that led them to detain you. And, if a jury just hears them say, well, I thought this, that may not be enough, especially if there's other holes in the officer's story or the report the officer wrote, that can really work for you. So, it's not a hopeless thing when a cop shows up. They're not going to detain you unless they know they can prove it in court, because especially if you show that you know your rights, because they know that in court they're going to have to prove they had a good reason to detain you. So, this whole thing you say about detaining, am I being detained? It's so important because it does require a burden of proof that there was something to be suspicious of.
Yeah. I mean, one experience I have that I can think of where I actually did show my ID, just to get out of a situation quicker, was when I was leaving my apartment building one night. There was a Ramsey County Sheriff's squad car out there, and I was walking out the building, and the police officer, or the deputy said, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And I was like, am I being detained? He's like, no, can I see your ID? And I'm like, well, why? And he said, well, we had a break-in in the garage. We just want to make sure you live here. And, there was a couple squad cars out front, too. So I was like, well, that seems reasonable. He really would have had the authority to detain me until he figured out who I was and if I lived there. So at that point in time, I just figured, well, it'll get me out of the situation quicker if I just show him my ID. Took my ID out of my wallet, showed it to him, looked at the address, handed it right back to me, and I was on my way that quick. Didn't run it or anything, just wanted to make sure I lived there. So you have to use your, be smart about it. Know when you should show your ID and when not. If you're in a large group of people and a cop asks you for your ID, you can refuse that. And most likely nothing bad is going to happen to you. But if you're walking through an alley and all of a sudden there's 6, police officers standing there asking you for your ID and there's nobody around, I'd probably recommend giving your ID. It'll probably keep you safer. So, this, just like cop watching, is all on an individual basis. Just because you have these rights doesn't mean that they will be respected by police officers. But it is a good idea to express your rights, to state your rights, because if you go to court and you say no, you can't search my car, and they search your car anyways, well then that evidence can get thrown out. So it's always good to assert your rights when safe. Does that make sense to you?
That makes absolute sense, because yeah, you're right. Asserting your rights won't always work, but it's the best shot you've got.
Right.
In a perfect world, the courts wouldn't be corrupt and it would work every time. But the fact of the matter is, it sometimes doesn't. But that should never discourage you from asserting your rights, because it definitely gives you more favorable odds of coming out okay when things go to court. Mm-hmm. It gives your lawyer tools they can use. So
right. Yeah. And in today's use of body cams and dash cams, it is important to verbalize your rights too, and loudly. Like if an officer says, "Can I search your car?" Say, "No, you do not have my permission to search my car." loudly. You can't, not just mumble like, no, 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 I don't want you to search my car. Because it could be captured by that body cam or the dash cam. Most people don't realize this, but a lot of police employees have a box they wear on their shoulder that is a microphone that is hooked up to their dash cam. It's a wireless microphone, so that captures everything you say while in a car or on foot or whatever. So it is extremely important to verbalize your rights to that police officer.